Welcome to Catholic Answers Live. My name is Edgar Lujano, filling in for Cy Kellett today. What a beautiful Friday we have here. It's going to be a great day because when you hear Fridays now here at Catholic Answers, you hear 2 full hours with Jimmy Akin. We get to do an Ask Me Anything. So if you want to go ahead and give us a call before they fully light up, you can give us a call at 888-318-7884. That's 888-31-TRUTH to get online with Jimmy Akin to ask him a question. He currently runs 2 podcasts, the Jimmy Akin Podcast and Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, which you can find on his YouTube channel. Just look up Jimmy Akin. You can find both of them on there. Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Edgar. Great to be working with you again. And even though my name is in 2 podcasts, I actually do 6 regularly, like every week.
All right, I stand corrected. What are the others?
Well, so the 2 that have my name on them are Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, which I've been doing for over 7 years now. And the other is the Jimmy Akin Podcast, which I've been doing for going on a year now. But in addition, there's a Daily Defense, which is a daily podcast that I recorded a while back. In addition, I'm on Catholic Answers Live, which is a podcast, so that's up to 4. And then I also regularly do Secrets of Star Trek and Secrets of Doctor Who, as well as appearing on other people's podcasts. But those are the 6 I do that you can get every week from me.
Great. Well, there you have it. Plenty to check out if you want to listen to Jimmy all week long. You have plenty to listen to.
I should add a 7th just so you have one every day. But a Daily Defense probably covers that.
Yeah, there you go. Were you doing something with Capturing Christianity? I remember there was a series that you'd started with him a while ago, or was that just a few episodes?
No, for people who may not be aware, Capturing Christianity is a YouTube channel by Cameron Bertuzzi, and he has me on periodically, and so he's one of any number of shows that you'll see me on.
Perfect.
From time to time.
Great. Well, if you want to talk to Jimmy, go ahead and give us a call. I think there's one line open, 888-318-7884. Well, with all those podcasts, Jimmy, let's start with one. What's going on Mysterious World today?
Well, the episode of Mysterious World that dropped today is part 2 of a look at Jack the Ripper. And last week we went over the canonical 5 Jack the Ripper crimes and talked about some of the evidence that we have regarding who Jack the Ripper may have been. And in today's episode, we go through the suspect list, or at least a suspect list, and talk about the evidence for and against different candidates. And I name the one that I think the evidence most strongly points towards as being the historical Jack the Ripper.
Okay. Well, there you have it. If you want to go ahead and listen to that, go to YouTube, check that out. You can also find it on any podcast platform that you listen to, Spotify, Apple Podcast. You can check it out on there. I got to say, Jimmy, when I used to drive for those blue trucks with the big smiley face on the side, and I remember binge listening to Mysterious World, so I got to just go off into my own mind as I was delivering packages. So that was always fun.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I hear things like that from folks. The other day I was walking through the supermarket, and one of the guys in the butcher department stopped and said, "You have an awesome podcast. I listen to it every day at work."
That's great. That's great. Love it. All right. Well, shall we get to calls?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Well, let's go over to actually right here in our backyard in Santee, California, where Will is listening on Catholic.com. Will, you are on the air with Jimmy Akin.
Hi, Jimmy. I had a question about your debate with Bart Ehrman on the historical accuracy of the Gospels.
Okay.
And the point he was making was about Jesus' message, how the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus never claims his divinity, but in John, it's very emphasized about the divinity of Jesus. But there's a passage in Matthew 22, it's right at the end, where the Pharisees have been confronting him with questions all day, and he's been answering them. And then he says, words to the effect of, "I have a question for you now." And he asks, "The Christ, whose son is he?" And the Pharisees answer, "David's." And then Jesus replies with the Psalm, either 109 or 110, where he says, "Then why does David call him Lord when he says, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. If the Christ is David's son, then why does David call him Lord?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember you had pointed out during the Q&A that when Jesus is being questioned by the high priest, asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of God?" And Jesus, basically affirms it. The high priest, accuses him of blasphemy. Here's the blasphemy. You heard it right here. And my question is, why does Bart not see that as a clear indication of Jesus claiming a divine a lordship, a share? He is the Lord, not just the son of David, like Solomon, because he pointed out that Solomon is also a son of God, but also a son of David. But in this case, Jesus, to me, is making a clear, no, I'm something different. The Christ is something different. And Lord.
So if you want to know why Bart doesn't recognize something as Jesus claiming divinity, I mean, you'd really have to ask Bart. I've never taken a telepathy test, but I suspect that I wouldn't score highly enough to be able to confidently discern what's in Bart's mind on that matter. But I can conjecture on that matter if you wish.
Well, I didn't know, maybe because I know the debate was a few years ago. I don't know if you followed up, if that's come out, or has that been pointed out?
No.
Hey, I think you overlooked this part here in Matthew.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't go to that part. I mean, this subject came up in the debate, not in our principal statements, but in either the Q&A period or the audience, either in the cross-examination period or the audience Q&A. So in either event, we had a very limited time to discuss it. And Bart and I haven't really had ongoing communication over the years. I have no problem having ongoing communication, but it's just something that debaters usually don't do because, if we're debaters, we tend to be doing other things. We've got careers and stuff. And so just because you debate someone doesn't mean you have ongoing communication with them. But if I were to conjecture, I would say that Bart likely would say that the author of Matthew's gospel, who he does not regard as being Matthew the Apostle, believed that Jesus was God. Bart doesn't have any problem acknowledging that the authors of the Synoptic Gospels believed that Jesus was God. But he might well then say this is just something that Matthew thought. It's not something that Jesus himself said, and that we can have confidence with him saying it. It also wouldn't prove for certain that that Jesus is God, because so what Jesus is quoting Psalm 110 here. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand, and so forth. And in Hebrew, in the Aramaic version that Jesus would have been using, there's a difference in the words for Lord here, or at least there is in the Hebrew. In Hebrew, it says, and Yahweh said to my Lord. And so the idea is that Jesus is, and this is identified as a Psalm of David. And so the idea is David is saying, the Lord said to my Lord, or Yahweh said to my Lord. And so the Christ, the Lord that's referred to here in the second instance, because it's Yahweh said to my Lord, the my Lord is David's Lord, and it would be inconsistent with the idea of the Messiah being a typical son of David if David refers to him as his own Lord, because in a patriarchal culture, the older generations, like David's generation, is older than Jesus's generation. The older generations are the ones with the power and prestige, and so it wouldn't make sense for David to refer to one of his descendants as his Lord. Now, so that calls for some kind of explanation. And one explanation is that his son his descendant, Jesus, is divine. but that's not the only explanation. There are other possibilities that one can envision from the literature of the period, like his son is a super angel in human form, or his son has a greater commission as the Messiah, even though he's purely human, or than David had, or something like that. So I can see a number of possibilities here that would allow Bart or other skeptics to try to evade the force of the passage. Now, I think Jesus is referring to the fact that he's God here, but it's not explicit in Matthew the way it is much more explicit in John. I also think there are other passages where Jesus very clearly identifies himself as God, but Bart has ways of disagreeing with those as well. And so it comes down to a question of, what degree of reliability do you think the Gospels have, which is what we were debating, and the individual arguments that can be made regarding particular passages. One that I think is particularly strong is in Mark 14, where Jesus is on trial with the Jewish Sanhedrin. And when he's asked, tell us plain by the high priest, tell us plainly if you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, he replies, yes. And from now on, you're going to see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of God. And he is alluding here to a passage in Daniel. And this passage in Daniel was about the Son of Man, or one like a Son of Man, was understood by many in the Jewish community as referring to a divine figure alongside God in heaven, who is sometimes referred to as the second Yahweh or the lesser Yahweh. But he is God, but he's somehow distinct from God. And I think that's what Jesus is referring to there. He is claiming divinity for himself. He's just doing it using a Jewish idiom. And I think the high priest recognized that, because at that point, the high priest tears his garments and says, you've all heard the blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Well, it wasn't blasphemy to claim to be a descendant of David, and it wasn't blasphemy to claim to be the Messiah. The Messiah was expected to come. But it would be blasphemy to claim to be the lesser Yahweh or the second Yahweh. And so I think that that this is a very strong indication that Jesus was claiming divinity for himself. He's just not using the word God to do it. He's using items of Jewish culture to express that concept. And Bart's answer to that is that he thinks Jesus is not the Son of Man. He thinks that Jesus did not identify himself as the Son of Man, but that's something that later disciples imposed on Jesus. I think that's nonsense. I think in order to get there, you have to cherry pick the text using weak arguments. And I think that we can rely upon the evangelists like Mark, who were either direct associates of Jesus or close associates of Jesus's associates, to understand Jesus's thought and accurately represent it as Jesus believed he was the Son of Man, and thus that he was this divine figure.
How's that, Will?
Right. Yeah, very good. I don't want to take up too much time, but I wanted to point out that this was Bart's third main point in his statement, Jesus' message, that he never claimed any sort of divinity in the Synoptics, but John was full of it. Therefore, even though it's not a contradiction, it just doesn't make sense. And he said that in his statement as his third point after the virgin birth and the.
So your question for me is?
No, I was just saying that. Well, no, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Nope, no problem. And I would say that John is just more explicit about this. Now, some folks have tried to explain that as Jesus taught more forthcomingly in private, and John focuses on his private teaching, whereas the synoptics don't. I think there's an element of that that's true. We do have evidence even in the synoptics, which is Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that Jesus was more forthcoming with his disciples than he was with the general public. He tells them that to outsiders, I'm going to talk in parables, but I'm going to explain the mysteries of the kingdom of God to y'all. But what we still don't find in the Synoptics is even in his private discussions with the disciples, he doesn't get explicit about "I am God," and so I think that he was more explicit in private is a partial but not fully successful answer. I would tend to say that because the evangelists had the ability to paraphrase, that John uses that ability to bring out more explicitly what's there for a Greek audience, what's there in the Synoptics, if you know the Jewish idioms that Jesus is relying upon.
Great, Will. Thank you so much for your question. We're going to go ahead and leave that right there because it's time for our break. And when we come back, we'll go ahead and take more questions on this Ask Me Anything Catholicism with Jimmy Akin.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Are you looking to study Catholic theology in a formal way with the guidance of faithful scholars? Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by the Augustine Institute, offering master's degrees in theology, pastoral theology, and Catholic education with flexible study options on campus, online, or both. The Augustine Institute equips students to serve Christ and His Church in schools, parishes, dioceses, apostolates, and the home. Learn more today at augustine.edu.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Hi, this is Father Mike Schmitz. Please join me for Ascension's Bible in a Year and Catechism in a Year here on EWTN Radio. We're going through the entire Bible and the Catechism in 365 days. If you've ever wanted to understand what it means to be Catholic and allow those truths to shape your life, this is for you.
Bible in a Year and Catechism in a Year with Father Mike Schmitz, tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. And back to the phones we go because the lines are filled. As per usual, whenever Jimmy's on, we go to our friend Ava in Canada, who watches us on YouTube. Ava, welcome to the show. It's good to hear from you.
Hello, thank you for taking my question. So my question is, I'm currently working on some articles deconstructing anti-Catholic chick tracts. And even though I've heard... and so I've heard a lot of his claims before, so I mainly know how to respond to them, but he's also making a lot of strange claims that I've never heard of before. In one of his tracts, he says that after Luther exposed the con job of indulgences, he was marked for death. So he seems to be implying that the Pope or the Church wanted Luther to be killed. Is there any truth to this, or is that made up?
Well, I can say I have no evidence for that. Now, anytime you talk about the church, the church is millions of people. Today it's over 1 billion. It's like 1.4 billion. But back in Luther's day, it was at least millions. And certainly millions of people didn't want Luther dead. I'm sure some Catholics would have preferred it if he were shuffled off this mortal coil. But I would interpret this statement from Jack Chick as meaning that, like, the Pope or somebody wanted him dead. And if I'm not aware of any evidence for that. I'm not closed to the idea, but I need to see evidence for it. And so if someone wants to claim this and wants me to believe them, then they need to give me some evidence for it. And so, I don't have encyclopedic knowledge of every single papal action that happened in the 1500s. So you're going to have to point me in the direction of this evidence if it exists. And then I can consider the evidence dispassionately and see, is this a good source or not? So I'm not aware of anything like that, but I can't say for 100% that no pope wanted Luther dead. But the burden of proof is on the person who makes a claim. So if they're claiming that, then they need to provide evidence for it. One thing that I would point out is Jack Chick is known, or was known, because he's passed on to his reward now. But one thing that Jack Chick was known for was using unreliable, salacious sources that were themselves inaccurate, like Charles Chiniquy, a former Canadian priest who wrote salacious books about the Catholic Church that were completely fictitious. He also used a gentleman named Alberto Rivera, who lived in the 20th century and claimed to be a secret Jesuit that had been sent to infiltrate Protestant churches. And he also made lots of ridiculous, inaccurate claims, and was later exposed by Christianity Today as a con man. But so I don't know who Chick's source was for this, but ultimately the burden would be on him to provide some evidence for this. If anyone can make any assertions they want, but if they want you to believe them, or you to at least take them seriously, they need to give you some evidence for it. And you haven't mentioned any, so I don't know that Chick provided any in the tract that you've been looking at.
Yeah, he doesn't cite a single source. All he says is Luther was marked for death.
Yeah. Well, okay, that's what he said, but I would be very dubious of that unless he can produce some kind of evidence for that.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ava. Jimmy, when I hear something like that, all I think of is papal assassins or something like that. Maybe it's the precursor to Dan Brown's idea of Opus Dei assassins that dress in Franciscan garb. Who knows?
Yeah. Now, I would say that at the time, people who were regarded as heretics were, taking risks with their lives. And that's true not just in the Catholic Church, but in the Protestant communions as well. Like John Calvin, for example, famously had Michael Servetus killed. So at the time, anybody from any religious communion who was regarded as a heretic by that communion, was taking their life in their hands. It would be the civil authorities, not the Catholic Church, that would actually, perform any such executions. And Luther had protection because he was under the protection of the German princes, and everybody knew that, and he was at various points given safe passage to attend various meetings and so forth, as were other Protestants. But if you say he was marked for death, I mean, that does suggest some kind of assassin has been set up to go after him, and that I have just no evidence for.
Yeah, great. Well, hopefully that's helpful, Ava. It's always good to hear from you. Keep on digging through those Chick tracks. Those are quite fascinating. I know you're a young caller, so it's an interesting piece of history there. Okay, keep going with that, Ava. All right, before we go to the break, let's go to one more call. Let's go to Vince in Roseville, California. He's watching us listening to us on the Catholic Answers Live app. Vincent, go right ahead with your question.
Hey, thank you. Hi, Jimmy. Happy Easter. I know we're all mourning the death of the Holy Father right now. And there's been a lot of content and a lot of stuff online, and a lot of. Sometimes you hear this, the saying like, "Oh, the Pope is in heaven now," or "The Pope has gone, to the house of the Father." And we know the Pope is a holy person, but I guess my question is, what is the attitude the average Catholic is supposed to have right now in regards to that issue? Are we supposed to say, "Hey, the Pope's in heaven," or is it we just say, "Hey, we just simply need to pray for the Pope right now"?
Well, so Edgar, how close are we to the break?
About 45 seconds before the music starts.
Okay, so I'll answer part of it right now, but I'll have to finish on the other side of the break. The truth is, we don't know what the state of the Pope's soul is, because we don't know what happens to people exactly when, in any individual person's case, when they die. We don't know for sure that the Pope died in God's friendship, although we may presume that he did. And if he did die in God's friendship, then he may need some purification before he arrives at the Father's house. Saying he has gone to the Father's house is something I don't have any kind of a problem with. That doesn't mean he's arrived at the Father's house yet, or heaven. On the other hand, God can purify someone instantaneously. And as Benedict XVI said, purgatory can't be calculated in earthly time. So this is a complex issue, and I'll finish up addressing it on the other side of the break.
All right, when we come back, Jimmy will finish that off, and we will continue with more calls. This is Catholic Answers Live.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, of morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Deepen your connection to the Church's holy days and seasons while you draw on the wisdom of the Church Fathers. Feasts of Our Fathers, the new book from Mike Aquilina and Adam Lucas, is a treasury of history, prayers, insights, and lessons that will bring you closer to the earliest of Catholic traditions. Take your prayer life and your solidarity with the Church, past and present, to a new level. Order your copy of Feasts of Our Fathers today at shop.catholic.com.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
On Monday's Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, our topic will be Give Me Your Best Clean Joke. And now, back to Catholic Answers Live with Cy Kellett.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Once again, Edgar Lujano filling in for Cy Kellett. Jimmy was in the middle of answering a question on how do we respond when somebody says that, almost canonizing a person by saying that they're already in heaven. And I think there's a tendency to do that, not just with the Pope, but with anybody. So Jimmy, you were in the middle of your answer?
Yeah, and I was in fact going to point out that the Pope is not canonized. And so consequently, we don't know what the state of his soul is. And the Catholic custom has always been to pray for the recently departed, and not to presume that they're already in heaven. Now, maybe he is already in heaven, but as Benedict XVI pointed out, it's never too late to pray for someone. So, God can apply the benefits of that prayer to the person when they were being purified and needed those prayers, even if that time is in the past from our perspective, because purgatory cannot be calculated in earthly time and God is outside of time and can apply the benefits of prayers to whenever they're needed. So between the fact that we don't know Pope Francis's the state of his soul and the fact that we can pray for him at any point in time, I think that the traditional approach of not informally canonizing people as soon as they're dead is the one to be followed here. And I think Pope Francis would actually support that, because when he was alive, he said, "I'm a sinner. I need people's prayers. Please pray for me." I think that he would like that principle applied to him. And just as a matter of general Catholic education, people should be educated to pray for the departed and not just assume that they don't need prayer.
How's that answer, Vince? Oh, that's my fault. I put him on hold. So, Vince, my apologies. Go right ahead.
No problem. I work in an office, so I know what that's all about. Thanks, Jimmy, for the great answer, and I appreciate you pointing out the difference between going to the Father's house and arriving. I think being precise in our language is important. So thanks again.
No problem.
All right. Thanks, Vince. Appreciate that call. We go over to Ryan in Illinois, watching us on YouTube. Ryan, go right ahead with your question.
Yes, I have a question regarding, so I've watched your videos, you've done streams and stuff on different channels about, the historical Adam and Eve, and I've been recently looking into that, like the evolutionary side of that, and I know the church doesn't permit polygenism because of how it could be reconciled with original sin, and it's,
they don't sorry, could you repeat that? Could you repeat that, what you just said?
Yeah, polygenism.
I know what polygenism is. What did you say about it?
Oh, how it could be reconciled with original sin.
Okay. I thought I heard you say that the church does not permit that.
Oh, they warned against it. Might be better wording. But I did see your videos on it, and you said that it's not completely forbidden. But my question is I was looking to certain the evolutionary evidence behind it, the science behind it, that do we all descend from Adam and Eve? It's kind of I don't see a lot of evidence for that, and that's what I've been kind of struggling with. Is there evidence that we actually share DNA or any sort of ancestry with them or their descendants for all of humanity to, so it's that's kind of my question, and I'm kind of struggling on that. So.
Okay. So are you? I guess there's a lot here that I could interact with. If you're asking about, do we have genetic evidence for a single couple, a single man and a woman that we are all descended from? The answer is no. We do have evidence for two figures that are known as the mitochondrial Eve and the Y chromosomal Adam. And so I'll explain what those are. In our cells, we have different organelles. They're like little bitty organs. The big one, the main one that people are familiar with, is the nucleus of the cell. And the nucleus of the cell contains DNA. And because this DNA comes from the nucleus, it's known as nuclear DNA. But we also have other organelles in our cells that are known as mitochondria, and they're involved in energy production for the cell, and they also contain DNA. Because this DNA doesn't come from the nucleus but comes from the mitochondria, it's known as mitochondrial DNA. Now, the nuclear DNA comes from both parents. Half of your nuclear DNA comes from your father, half of your nuclear DNA comes from your mother. When it comes to mitochondrial DNA, though, all of it comes from your mother. The father does not make any contribution to the DNA in the mitochondria. And that means that you can trace maternal lines using mitochondrial DNA. So a number of years ago, there were studies that were done that showed that all living humans have a common maternal ancestor who is, and since she was detected using mitochondrial DNA, she's known as the mitochondrial Eve. That's all living humans. That's not to say all humans in history were descended from her, but all living humans were descended from her. Then there's the Y chromosomal Adam. Now, the Y chromosome, which is what makes a man, is inherited only from the father. So this is kind of the genetic flip side of mitochondrial DNA. If you have a Y chromosome, you got it from your father. Your mom did not make any contribution to the DNA in your Y chromosome. And so you can use the Y chromosome to trace male lines. And again, a few years ago, but more recently, there was research done that indicated that all live-in humans are descended from a single man. And he was detected using Y chromosomal DNA. So he's known as the Y chromosomal Adam. So you've got something and again, it's not all humans in history are descended from Y chromosomal Adam, but all live-in humans are descended from Y chromosomal Adam. Now, the difficulty, even though we've got these two figures, and they're even called Adam and Eve in the literature, they were not a couple. They lived at different times, tens of thousands of years apart, because we can tell how far back in the genetic history based on the mutation rate, both the mitochondrial Eve and the Y chromosomal Adam lived. So even though some people looked at the discovery of these two figures as, oh, this confirms the Bible, well, no, not really, because they were not a married couple. And they're just our most recent female common ancestor and our most recent male common ancestor. But that doesn't make them universal ancestors of all of humanity, of all humans living in all times, just the people who are alive today. So that then opens up a further question of, do we have evidence genetically regarding the size of the human population at different points in history? Did it ever go down to just two people? And that's something that we can provide reasonable estimates of, because by looking at the genomes of living people, you can infer some things about their ancestors. And there are what are known as population bottlenecks. A population bottleneck is what happens when you've got a population and a lot of it either dies or fails to reproduce for some reason. And so the breeding population is smaller than it was. That's why it's called a bottleneck. And then if you have a population bottleneck, the species may die out, or it may have a renaissance and start expanding again. So you've got larger breeding populations. But it appears, based on the data we've got, that that humanity, or either modern humans or our ancestors, have been through several population bottlenecks. And there were times when the number of humans got quite small, but never less than 1,000 people or so. And so we don't have the scientific evidence we have does not suggest that that there was ever a period where humanity consisted of just two individuals. So how can you square that with the presentation we have of Adam and Eve in Genesis? Well, there are basically at least three ways. The first way is to say, well, despite the scientific evidence, there really were just two people at one point. And the scientific evidence is either wrong, or God did miracles in order to get more genetic diversity into the human race than those two individuals could have had in their own genomes. So you can appeal to miracles as an explanation for how there could just be two literal individuals only at one point. So that's the first option. A second option is to say, well, Adam and Eve were two literal individuals, but they were part of a broader population. There were what you might, in addition to Adam and Eve, there were other people that you might call pre-Adamites. That's a term that was used for them back in the 1800s, or co-Adamites, meaning they either preceded or lived alongside Adam and Eve. And so even though we may have had a period where there were like 1,000 humans, Adam and Eve were two of that 1,000 humans. And so that's a second possibility. And then a third possibility is that Adam and Eve should not be understood as two literal individuals, but as representative, as symbols representing the human population as a whole. And that could be suggested by the facts that their names mean mankind. That's what Adam means. And life. That's what Eve means. So these symbolic names could indicate that we're dealing with symbols here. And there are other arguments that people make for and against each of these three positions. But at this point in church history, the magisterium is permitting all three of those. So there was, as you said, a caution issued in 1950 by Pope Pius X in his encyclical Humanae Generis, where he said that it wasn't clear how the idea that there were more than two individuals could be squared with the church's teaching on original sin. And what that had the effect of doing was focusing theologians' attention on how could we square this. And that led to the development of the other two theories that I mentioned, where if Adam and Eve were two members of a larger population, they may have been the federal heads of that larger population. So when they fell, everybody fell. Or if they are symbolically representing humanity as a whole, then what that means is humanity as a whole turned its back on God and fell into original sin. And by the mid-1960s, the Vatican newspaper, L'Osservatore Romano, was publishing articles about this, saying here are some ways that we could square these things. And so even though it's not the church doesn't currently have a teaching regarding one of these three is definitely the case, it is currently allowing theologians to discuss these ideas, and it may give us a ruling at some future point on them.
Ryan, thank you so much for your question. We're going to go ahead and leave that right there because it's time for the final break of the hour. And when we come back, we're going to have some more Ask Me Anything questions on Catholicism with Jimmy Akin.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
He was a Jesuit, a cardinal, and a doctor of the Church.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Robert Bellarmine is honored for his immense contributions to theology, including helping to draft two important catechisms that defended church teachings during the Protestant revolt. Pope Clement VIII named Bellarmine a cardinal because, as the Pope put it, Bellarmine had not his equal for learning.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. You know, Jimmy Akin has written some of the best Catholic books available. The Fathers Know Best, Teaching with Authority, The Bible is a Catholic Book, A Daily Defense, The Drama of Salvation, and so many more. Well, the good thing about all of this is that we currently have a sale for Easter where you can get all of them for a great price. And not only that, but if you include the promo code SHOWERS, you can save an extra 20% off on the already discounted prices. So go to shop.catholic.com and pick up those Jimmy Akin books. You will not regret it. So shop.catholic.com, use the promo code SHOWERS and get an extra 20% off on the already discounted prices. All right, and lines continue to be full, so we're going to jump right back in. We go to Stephen in San Antonio, Texas, who's listening on the Guadalupe Radio Network out there. Stephen, go right ahead with your question.
Yes, I was just wondering, where was Jesus born? Because I believe it was last week or sometime earlier this week you said that. No, well, Bethlehem. But was he born in a house or was he born in the cave?
Well, why not both? I would say he was born in a cave house. because Bethlehem is a community where there are caves in the area. And when the Israelites and later the Judeans had a cave, they didn't shy away from building a house over it. There are cave houses in Israel today. And so we have evidence from Luke's gospel that says that there was no room for the there's no room in the kataluma. Kataluma is a Greek word that means the living space. And that's why Mary put Jesus in a manger, because the living space in the house was all full up. And animals were frequently at the time stored on the lower level of the house, while the living space, the kataluma, was upstairs. And if you lived in a cave house, then the bottom floor where you'd put the animals, that was part of the cave. And that's the situation that we find in Bethlehem today. If you go to the Church of the Nativity, you have this structure. It's a church today. And any original house there is kind of gone at this point, and they've subsequently built this church. But it's built on top of a cave, and there's, stairs cut into the rock leading down into the cave and so forth. And there's actually more than one chamber in the cave that tradition holds were used when Jesus was born. And we actually have evidence from the 2nd century indicating that Jesus was born in a cave. So I see the Gospel of Luke and the 2nd century tradition of Jesus being born in a cave as consistent with each other. So I would say Jesus was born in a cave house.
Sound fair, Steve?
Okay. Yes, gotcha.
All right, great, Stephen. Thank you for the call. Well, we're going to go ahead and stay in San Antonio, Texas, because Tom is also listening on the Guadalupe Radio Network out there. Tom, welcome to the show. You're on live with Jimmy Akin.
Yeah, hi. I was just calling. Most of my extended family down here goes to a Protestant church. Is it okay as long as I still go to Mass on Wednesday or Saturday or the early service to also go to a Protestant service afterwards?
Well, on Sundays and other holy days of obligation, you need to go to Mass, and you can do that either on the holy day itself, so that would be like on Sunday itself, or on the evening of the preceding day, so that would be like going on Saturday evening. But you can't do it other days of the week unless your pastor were to give you a dispensation to do it some other day of the week. So you'd need to go to Mass on a weekly basis, either at some time on Sunday or on Saturday evening. And if you do that, well, what you do with the rest of your time is up to you. So if you wanted to attend church services with your Protestant relatives, you could do that. You would want to make sure that you're not doing anything that endangers your faith. So, if you are exposing yourself to ideas and claims that are going to be that would have a tendency to undermine your faith, well, then you shouldn't be going. Also, you'd want to act consistent with Catholic teaching when you go, like you wouldn't want to be saying amen to prayers that contradict Catholic doctrine. But there's no problem saying amen to prayers that don't contradict Catholic doctrine. You also wouldn't be able to receive communion in these churches, so you need to refrain from doing that. But in principle, if you want to go to a Protestant service, you can do that as long as you're not doing something inconsistent with the Catholic faith, and as long as you are fulfilling your obligations as a Catholic to make sure you get to Mass in the correct time frame.
Does that sound okay?
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Great.
No problem.
Perfect. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for that question. We go to Steve in Portland, Oregon, watching on YouTube. Steve, welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. I had heard reports that last year the Vatican was in discussion with some conservative Anglican groups about the possibility of re-entering communion with conservative and traditional Anglicans. And so I was just wondering if, to your knowledge, these reports were legitimate, and whether that would be expected to continue under a new pope, or if that would now be on hold in light of Pope Francis's passing.
Okay, well, the reports, my understanding is true. There are some conservative Anglicans who have apparently, there are press reports that I have no reason to doubt, because the people involved in the discussions have confirmed it, that they have been in discussion about the possibility of reestablishing communion with the Catholic Church. And last year, or maybe the year before, they believe it was last year, they actually went over to the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith and were having these discussions with them. Nothing has been announced on this, so this is kind of behind the scenes stuff, but the reports seem to be accurate. When it comes to what's going to happen in the future, well, for now it is on hold because we're in an interregnum between two popes, and the Vatican does not announce major decisions like this when we're in an interregnum. The College of Cardinals is supposed to defer all major decisions to the new pope. So if we were to re-enter communion with this group of Anglicans, that would be a decision for a future pope to make. Now, having said that, I don't see any reason why that wouldn't happen. The popes in recent times have really taken to heart the need to promote Christian unity and try to reestablish unity with people. And if the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith has looked into the matter and concluded that the conditions have been met for a reestablishment of communion, then I would take that seriously, and I suspect any future pope would too. So I wouldn't at all be discouraged about this, but we are going to have to wait until there's a future pope. Now, hypothetically, a new pope could come in and say, "Oh, I totally disagree," and put the kibosh on the whole thing. But I would remain cautiously optimistic. But as they say, don't count your chickens before they're hatched. So we just have to wait and see what will come of this. But I think there is reason for cautious optimism.
Any follow-ups?
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right.
No
great.
problem.
Thanks, Steve. All right. I want to see if I can maybe get one more question in, but it's going to have to be quick. So if you can just give us the question, Jack in North Carolina, and we'll get you an answer. Go right ahead.
Hey there. Thanks for taking it. My question is around the Catholic Church's understanding of the papacy, and specifically going to the gospel of where Jesus hands Peter the keys, and being able to kind of keep that in line with the successors of Peter in Rome. My question was around, could there be other claims about the keys, since Peter also founded the church in Antioch with Paul, and that there's also, tradition holds that he consecrated James as Bishop of Jerusalem and Mark in the Bishop of Alexandria, and obviously these are major churches today, and I'm understanding that the Orthodox kind of have that claim, that it's not solely meant to be the successor of the Bishop of Rome, but that Peter also founded other churches that are major keys. I just want to understand what the response would be for that.
Well, I think it's true that Peter did minister in other churches, and so I don't have any problem acknowledging that. But that doesn't mean that that's where he left his successor. And even in, for example, Orthodox circles, even though they'll say, well, there's a sense in which the Bishop of Antioch is a successor of Peter because Peter at one time ministered at Antioch, or you could say the Bishop of Jerusalem, the same thing. Even they acknowledge that there's a unique sense in which the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, is the successor of Peter. So I think we can acknowledge that, yeah, Peter ministered in other places, and he ordained people that, left lines that may even be with us today. But there is a special sense in which the Bishop of Rome is the successor of Peter, and that tends to be acknowledged even by people who are coming from an Orthodox perspective, who would acknowledge the Pope, for example, as a first among equals, or primus inter pares.
Great, Jack. Thank you so much for your question. That's going to do it for the first hour, but the good thing is we have a whole second hour of an Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin. So Another good thing is that there are a few lines open, so if you have a question that you want to ask Jimmy, you can go ahead and give us a call, 888-318-7884. That's 888-31-TRUTH. And you can get on the phone with Jimmy because there are a few lines open. So give us a call, and we will be right back with Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. My name is Edgar Lujano, one of the producers for the live show, and filling in for Cy Kellett today on this wonderful Friday evening, late afternoon, early evening. I don't know. What do you think, Jimmy?
Depends on where you are.
That's true. Or morning if you're in Australia, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. Well, there are a few lines open. If you want to talk to Jimmy today, we have a whole hour. So let's go. 888-318-7884. I'll say it a little more slow for those, for people like me who probably need it slower. 888-318-7884. So we talked about Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World in the first hour. So let me ask you about the Jimmy Akin podcast. What's going on? Well, on Monday.
Oh, sure. Well, first, though, I wanted to compliment you on saying the phone number at a human speed and clearly enunciating it. Mary Poppins would be proud.
Oh, thank you. That's all I need. That's all I need. I can die happy.
Now, if you say supercalifragilisticexpialidocious loud enough, you'll always sound precocious, though.
I don't even know if I could say the word, so I'm not even going to
So coming up on the Jimmy Akin podcast this coming Monday, I have a look at a subject that I primarily deal with how Jewish people reckoned the start and the end of the day. You often hear that Jewish people in the Jewish reckoning that the day begins at sunset and then so you have evening first and then morning. And there's an element of truth to that, but it's actually more complicated than that. And so I'm going to talk about the different practices that different groups of Jews have used throughout history regarding reckoning the day. And one of the reasons I'm talking about that is because you often hear that the ability to go to a vigil mass on Saturday evening is because the Jewish day begins at sunset. And so it's like if you go to a vigil mass on Saturday evening, we're kind of following an ancient Jewish practice. But and I'm going to tell you the real story about that and how the custom of doing vigil masses got introduced and what, if anything, it has to do with when the Jewish day begins.
Okay, great. I wanted to ask you then, does that also have some correlation to when we count the 3 days from Jesus' death to the resurrection as well, or is that something completely different?
No, the timing of those days does depend on which reckoning system you're using. So one of the things you'll notice in the Gospels, now Jesus gets crucified on Friday afternoon. And they point out, that one of the evangelists, that they had to do the burial in haste because the Sabbath was beginning. And that tells us that at least this group of Jews at this time was treating the Sabbath as beginning at sundown on Friday. But that is not the universal practice among Jews.
Okay, well, there you have it. If that piqued your interest, go to Jimmy Akin's YouTube channel. You can find it there.
YouTube.com/Jimmy Akin or in any of the standard podcast directories.
All right, there you have it. Perfect. Well, we got a few lines open, so if you want to go ahead and give us a call, 888-318-7884. We go to Robert in Illinois, listening to us on the Catholic Answers Live app. Robert, you are on the air with Jimmy Akin.
Hi, thanks for taking the call. Are the 12 stars on the Miraculous Medal more for the 12 tribes or for the 12 apostles?
Well, that's something I can't really answer because reportedly the Miraculous Medal was designed by, was revealed to St. Catherine Labouré and reportedly designed by the Virgin Mary herself. So you'd have to ask Mary. And I can tell you where I think they come from. And that is that 12 stars is a common symbol of Mary, and that's based on Revelation chapter 12, where John sees the sign of a great woman in heaven, and she's wearing a crown of 12 stars. And she also has she's clothed with the sun and has the moon at her feet. And one, not the only thing, but one of the things that this woman represents is the Virgin Mary. And so since then, in Christian iconography, 12 stars associated with a woman has been a symbol of Mary. And so I would assume that, either the Virgin Mary herself or St. Catherine Labouraire's subconscious, or some combination of those two, was responsible for her seeing the design of the Miraculous Medal as including these 12 stars. Now, there's a further backstory to where the 12 stars come from, because that symbolism of sun, moon, and 12 stars itself comes from the Old Testament. If you look in Genesis chapter 37, Joseph, the patriarch Joseph, as a boy, is having these dreams. And his first dream is that he and his brothers are harvesting grain, and each one of them has a sheaf of grain, and all of their sheaves of grain, or sheaves of grain, bow down to Joseph's, which is a sign that Joseph is going to, in the future, this is a precognitive dream, or prophetic dream, he's going to have some kind of preeminence over them in the future. And he tells them this story, and they get honked off. But then he has another dream, and in this other dream, he dreams that there are these stars that are bowing down to him, along with the sun and the moon. And the meaning of this is obvious. The sun represents his father Jacob, the moon represents his mother, and the stars represent his brothers. So, and his father Jacob even is incredulous when he hears this dream and says, "Oh, what do you think? Your mom and I are going to really be bowing down to you?" But yeah, they are going to be. This is the beginning of the Joseph narrative in Genesis, and it does end up with his brothers paying him homage, his family in general paying him homage. So this dream is right, and consequently, the image of the sun, the moon, and 12 stars represents the patriarch Joseph, Joseph's mother, and the 12 tribes of Israel. And so, and then later, Jesus based the 12 apostles apparently on the 12 tribes of Israel. So I would say that that the 12 stars that appear on the Miraculous Medal are most directly based on Revelation 12, which is itself based on Genesis 37. And that the idea, but that doesn't stop us from saying that those 12 stars from Genesis 37 represent the 12 tribes. They do. And I don't see any reason to exclude them in principle from also referring to the 12 apostles, whose number is based on the 12 tribes. So I would say, it's all of the above.
It's a good clarification for me.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks for the question, Robert. All right, let's go to the break, and then we'll come back and take some more questions. There's going to be one line open if you want to ask Jimmy a question. 888-318-7884.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
Pope Francis tells us, becoming a priest or a man or woman religious is not primarily our own decision. Rather, it's the response to a call of love. Do you feel as if God may be calling you to religious life? If so, contact a religious order faithful to the magisterium or your diocesan vocation. For information on the priesthood or religious life, visit ewtn.com/religiouslife today.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Once again, Edgar Lujano, producer for the show, filling in for Cy Kellett. It's an Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin. So let's go back to the calls, since there's plenty of calls on hold. We go to Joseph in Arlington, Virginia, also listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. Joseph, go right ahead with your question.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I wanted to present to you an ethical dilemma that I've been struggling with recently. So basically, I'm sure you might be familiar with the dead donor rule, which is endorsed by the Catholic Church. The dead donor rule states that an organ donor's death is defined at the cessation of neurological function, brain death. However, the dead donor can still metabolize nutrients with the support of extraordinary means. He's still a whole organism, and he's, of course, still human. So how come when it's an organ donor, they're dead, but when it's an unborn baby, they're alive?
Okay, so I would say a couple things here. The first one is the neurological criteria of brain death as a determinative for physical death is debated in the Catholic Church. There was a document that came out towards the end of John Paul II's reign that said when brain activity has stopped, irreversibly in an individual, that the rest of their body is going to disintegrate, anyway, because the brain's no longer organizing it, and therefore you can use that as a criterion for determination of physical death and thus organ donation. But at least for those organs that you can't live without, you can donate things like kidneys, while you're alive, and it's no problem because you only need one kidney, so you can donate the other if need be. But very quickly after this document was released, there was pushback from Catholic bioethicists who, not all of them, but from some of them, who thought that brain death is an inadequate criterion for physical death. And they cited various things in that regard. One of them is just exactly the factors that you mentioned. The body is still alive. So I would say somatic death, which soma is Greek for body, somatic death has not occurred when the essential forms of brain function have ceased. And we don't really know how irreversible some of this is, and the medical profession right now cannot be trusted with adequately diagnosing brain death because there is an anti-life ethic in much of the medical community that wants to declare a person dead as soon as possible so they can harvest the organs and stop charging the insurance company. And so very quickly, Pope Benedict XVI said, yeah, there can still be debate on this. So this is actually a debated issue in the Catholic Church.
Yeah. So you mentioned irreversibility. So let's say the patient, the brain dead patient who is an organ donor, their state of neurological cessation is irreversible. Then would you definitively know that they're dead?
Well, I would. So if you're asking my opinion here, I would say no, because I'm on the side that says brain death does not determine somatic death, and so consequently, if you're talking about an unborn child and he has metabolism, I would say, yeah, he's alive. And if you've got a person, even if they've lost brain function, as long as their body still has metabolism, I would say somatic death has not occurred and this person is not really dead yet. So that's my opinion, but it is not the opinion that others have. So there's a diversity of opinion here. And I tend to err on the side of caution. And I can see where someone might try to draw a distinction here and say, well, with an unborn child, they may not have brain function now, but they have not irreversibly lost it. And their body in the unborn state, before they even develop a brain, is not dependent on the brain the way an adult person's body is dependent on the brain. And so if you lose so there is a distinction here that if you have an unborn child that has not yet developed a brain, their life is not dependent on it. But if you have an adult whose body has become dependent on their brain and they lose brain function, then their body will soon die. So there is a distinction to be drawn here between the two situations. But my inclination is to err on the side of safety, and as long as the person still has metabolism, say, yeah, they cannot safely be declared dead, and we can't cut them up for parts.
And you also mentioned somatic death. Is somatic death commensurate to spiritual death?
Well, spiritual death is a term that is generally used to refer to the removal of sanctifying grace from the soul. And so someone's spiritually dead if they don't have sanctifying grace in their soul, but they're spiritually alive if they do have sanctifying grace in their soul. So that's how that term is used, and it wouldn't have anything to do with bodily death. You can be both spiritually alive and physically alive. You can be both physically alive and spiritually dead. You can be both spiritually alive and physically dead, and you can be spiritually alive and physically alive. So you've got a whole square of opposition there. They don't, they're two separate issues. If you mean something like dead from God's perspective, or what you might call theological death, that's something that is even less well defined than physical death. We do have the statement in James chapter 2 that the body without the spirit is dead, but we can't empirically detect the spirit, so we have to rely on proxies, like does this person have metabolism, or do they have a function in brain, or do they have a function in heart, or things like that. And we have to kind of use those proxies for when a person is really most sincerely dead, and kind of leave the exact determination of when someone is really most sincerely dead up to God.
So when someone is somatically dead, it's implied that their soul has separated from their body.
That is the assumption on which these calculations are based, or these considerations are based.
All right, Joseph, thank you so much for your question. We're going to go ahead and move on from there. We go over to Steve in Canada, who's listening on Catholic.com. Steve, go right ahead with your question.
Hello.
Hi
Thank
there.
you for taking my call.
Mm-hmm. Go right ahead.
This is, my question is hypothetical. So, considering that all the Cardinals will be meeting at the Vatican to elect a new Pope, or for that matter, at any election of a new Pope, who would elect the next Pope if, let's assume, the Cardinals were kidnapped and killed, including the Carmelengo, the auxiliary bishop of Rome, and those Cardinals that are 80 years of age or more? In a case scenario as such, who would be in charge of organizing the election of the new Pope? Or how would the election of the head of the church take place? That's my question.
Okay, so Steve, let me ask a clarifying question. In the scenario that you just described, are any of the College of Cardinals left alive?
No.
Okay, so we've wiped out all the Cardinals. The answer is that the law does not currently provide for this. People always wonder about these science fiction scenarios, and frankly, I wish the popes would worry about them a little more too. Now, the odds of something like this happening, being able to kill all the cardinals in the world all at once before any new cardinals could be appointed, that's kind of a very improbable situation. But improbable things can happen, and so if I were Pope, and by the way, if elected, I refuse to serve. That's my standard response on that question. But if I were Pope, I would give thought to having a document somewhere that specifies what would happen in situations like this. Like, what if someone, all the cardinals are meeting there and someone drops a nuke? on St. Peter's Basilica and kills them all. What do you do then? Well, I'd like to have provisions for that situation. One of the provisions that I would likely make is I would want to have some of the over 80s in an undisclosed location for safety purposes during the conclave, so that if something happens in the main location, the over 80s can come out of the undisclosed location. This is the same, and this is why, during crises here in America, the president and the vice president or some member of the cabinet has to be in a protected location. You can't get everybody together all at once in a crisis. And I would tend to do the same thing with the College of Cardinals. But thus far, so far as we know, there is no such document specifying that. So we would be in a case that is beyond the law. We'd be in uncharted territory. Now, I think what would happen, and this is all speculation, but I think what would happen is there would be some kind of consultation among the next highest ranking folks in the church, because it's going to be hard without an ecumenical council to gather all of the bishops. But I suspect what would happen is there would be some kind of consultation, an emergency consultation among the surviving archbishops who were not cardinals. And they would probably produce a mechanism, maybe either by having the archbishops gather or some subset of the archbishops would be nominated to hold a new conclave, and they would then elect a new pope. But this is speculative because we've never been in this situation and the law doesn't provide for it. But I suspect that the next people down in the hierarchy, namely the archbishops, would be tasked with coming up for an emergency election mechanism in this situation. And I suspect it wouldn't be a full consultation of bishops because there are too many of them. But even with the archbishops, I suspect they might designate certain people to do the conclave, like some subset of the archbishops.
Steve?
Yes. Thank you for that response. That was very insightful.
Yeah, no problem. I think about these science fiction scenarios all the time.
Well, the thing that's in my head now is what would happen, not that you would accept the election, Jimmy, but what would happen if you become a pope? Would there be a blend between a mitre and a cowboy hat? That's the real question.
Well, you probably, I've got multiple hats, so I could add a mitre to the collection, and I'd wear it on mitre-appropriate occasions.
There you go, perfect. All right, Steve, thanks for that fun scenario. We're not going to go to the next call real quick. I just want to reiterate this pitch that Carrie gave me because it's such a great deal right now over at shop.catholic.com. All of Jimmy's books, actually all of the books that we have right now at shop.catholic.com are on sale specifically for Easter week. So go ahead and head on over. You can get great books, like all the 20 Answers books, by the way. The Fathers Know Best, Teaching with Authority, The Bible is a Catholic Book, A Daily Defense, The Drama of Salvation, and all of our new ones that are out as well. You can get on sale right now. And just for this weekend only, we have the promo code SHOWERS, and you can get an extra 20% off the already discounted books. So make sure you head on over to shop.catholic.com and pick up some books as maybe an Easter gift to yourself or a loved one, especially for those who had just gone through RCIA and are officially confirmed and have entered into the Catholic faith. So it's something great to get for them as well. Shop.catholic.com. Now, Jimmy, before we go to the break, because we do have about 1 minute left, you had mentioned your recent episode on the Jimmy Akin podcast, but I was looking on the YouTube channel, and there's one that piqued my interest. I think you partially covered that, is who can receive communion at.
That was last week's.
Last week's, okay. It's so interesting. I was at a Mormon church, I guess, Mormon church, and still the offering. So can Catholics receive communion at other places? I guess softball question for you.
It depends on is the sacrament valid or not. Now, in Eastern Orthodox or Oriental Orthodox communions, they have valid sacraments. And so there are situations like if a Catholic is not able to, let's say you're in the middle of an Eastern Orthodox country, there are no Catholic parishes around, you could go to an Eastern Orthodox church and receive there. On the other hand, if the sacrament is not valid in a particular church, and this is going to be the case in the overwhelming majority of Protestant churches and also in Mormon churches, then you can't receive it there. The sacrament needs to be valid, and there are some other conditions that need to be met. But the fundamental one is the sacrament valid in the church you're at? If it is, then it's at least a possibility. But if it's not, it is not a possibility.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jimmy, for that. Appreciate that. All right, well, we're going to go to the hard break, and when we come back, we're going to have more questions. It's an Ask Me Anything Catholicism with Jimmy Akin. Give us a call, 888-318-7884.
Have you ever wondered about the mysterious, even obscure aspects of the Catholic faith? Dive into the Jimmy Akin podcast, where Jimmy brings together information from many fields as he pushes the boundaries of apologetics. Tune in today to the Jimmy Akin podcast, Mysteries of the Faith, a highly entertaining, informative, and at times humorous show that will help you grow in your faith. Visit JimmyAkinPodcast.com today to subscribe.
Lots of people have big questions about Catholicism. It needs a big book of answers. And now it's got one. The Big Book of Catholic Answers is filled with helpful replies to more than 250 questions about the faith. Questions about God, salvation history, the Creed, the Bible, the list goes on and on. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
On Monday's Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, our topic will be Give Me Your Best Clean Joke. And now, back to Catholic Answers Live with Cy Kellett.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live, and the lines continue to be full, so we jump back in with Alyssa in Austin, Texas, listening to Armor of God Radio. Alyssa, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. So my question is related to the LDS Church. I've been talking with a Mormon friend, and she quoted these two Bible verses that I hadn't really heard before as evidence of the Mormon belief in polytheism and that we will become gods after death, or can become. So the verses, hold on, let me bring them up. The verses are Psalm 82:6. And again, when Jesus quotes it in John 10:31 through 33. Basically, Jesus is talking to some Jews, and they, criticize him for saying he's God, and he says, "Is it not written in your law? I have said you are gods." Sorry, toddlers in the background.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good. It's better to have toddlers in the background than not to have toddlers in the background.
Yeah, it is.
So Alyssa, are you just wondering how to respond to these claims?
Yeah. How do I explain this verse in terms of Trinitarian theology and against the idea that we would become gods?
So the first thing to do, since we're dealing with an Old Testament text here that's then used in a New Testament text, which then needs to be related to Christian theology, is start with the original. Figure out what the original text means, then we can look at how it's used in the New Testament, and then we can figure out how it relates to theology. What we don't want to do is take a modern theology and read it backwards onto the text. That's eisegesis rather than exegesis. So in this case, we just starting with Psalm 82. It says, God presides in the great, this is starting with verse 1. It says, God presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods. Now, what this is referring to is what's known in scholarly literature as the divine council. One of the things that you find in ancient Near Eastern literature is that deity, that the high god, was pictured as a king, and kings are surrounded by their councils, who are their officials. And so it was assumed that, well, okay, our God, Yahweh, he's a great king, so he's going to have this divine council around him. And he's the high God, so any other heavenly beings up there are subordinate to him. And there's a question of, do you want to call them gods or not at that point? Now, today, we tend to use a different word for the subordinate heavenly beings. Today we call them angels, but back then they would call them gods. But they recognized there's a difference of kind between Yahweh, who's the infinite creator of everything, who's way above everybody else, and these lesser gods that, and they might say, okay, these other nations, like the Moabites and the Egyptians and stuff like that, they have their gods, but they've got these little bitty gods that are not comparable to the true creator Yahweh. And so the image that Psalm 82 is using here is of Yahweh and his divine council. And so God is presided in this council, in this great assembly, and it says he renders judgment among the gods. And then Yahweh says to the members of the divine assembly, how long will you defend the unjust and show partiality to the wicked? So he's charging them with doing bad stuff. He says, defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. The gods know nothing. They understand nothing. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. And Yahweh says, I said, you are gods. You are all sons of the Most High. But you will die like mere mortals. You will fall like every other ruler. And then the psalmist says, rise up, O God, judge the earth, for all the nations are your inheritance. So this is based on an idea that we find in a number of places in the Old Testament, that God has this heavenly council. They're referred to as the sons of God, even though they're really created beings. And today we call them angels. And he put them in charge of the other nations, but they've done bad stuff. Among other things, they've encouraged the people subject to them to worship them instead of the creator. And so here God is denouncing these so-called sons of God that are governing the nations, and he's like going to topple them. And the psalmist is encouraging this. It's like, rise up, God, the whole earth is yours. We don't need these other so-called gods or angels ruling these other nations. I mean, you take charge, God. You go, God. So that's basically what's happening in Psalm 32, according to its background with ancient Near Eastern literature. But not everyone agrees with that. There have been attempts to interpret the word Elohim, or gods in this passage, in a different sense, as referring to judges. So the idea here is that God is judging human rulers, like he's judging human judges and accusing them of misconduct. But that reading is really strained. It really does look like here we have God, the true God, the ultimate God, berating these other heavenly beings who in this context are called gods, but we today would call them angels. So I think that's what this psalm is referring to. So I would agree that this text does envision God as being part of the leader of a heavenly council that includes beings who are at least described as sons of God, even though today, as a Christian, I would classify them as created beings who are also angels. So that's what I'd have to say, unless something else occurs to me that's relevant to this Old Testament text. Then we move to the New Testament and Jesus's use of this in the Gospel of John. Now, as you point out, Jesus's critics have been objecting to him on the grounds that he makes himself equal with God. And he then cites Psalm 82, where where Yahweh is depicted as saying to the members of the council, "You are gods." And Jesus says something very interesting. He says, "If therefore those to whom the word of God came can be called gods, then why are you objecting to me doing that?" Now, it's interesting. I find that it's interesting that he uses the phrase "those to whom the word of God came," and that fits with Psalm 82 because Yahweh himself is talking to the member of the divine council when he says, "You're all gods. You're all sons of the Most High." So he's talking to them. So the word of God came to them. And so whatever else is the case about these beings that are being addressed in Psalm 82, they are those to whom the word of God came. God was talking to them. And so that sidesteps the issue of, are they really gods, or are they really angels, or are they really human judges? So Jesus is dodging the question, or at least one construction of this is he's dodging the question of what's the exact nature of these beings that are under discussion in Psalm 82. You could support any of those three theories I just mentioned. And so Jesus seems to be sidestepping that question and just saying, hey, look, the Old Testament calls people besides Yahweh God. So that can happen. So you shouldn't automatically be condemning me for making myself equal to God. And he's using this passage as what you might call a squelch to shut up his opponents by giving them a conundrum that they don't know how to solve, because it's undeniable the people in this psalm get called gods, and they are those to whom the word of God came. So I think that's what Jesus is doing in John's gospel with this passage. Now, how do we relate this to theology, to later theology? Well, Mormons have proposed that humans and God and angels are all the same species, and that it's possible for humans and angels to ultimately become gods of their own planets. But there's nothing in the text that says that. That is not in Psalm 82. That is not in John's gospel. Neither of the passages that we've talked about have said humans can progress to become gods of the same type that the Creator is. So that's something that they're reading into the text. They're not getting it out of the text. On the other hand, Christians, in their use of this text, if on the assumption that I think is correct, that these are lesser, in Psalm 82, are lesser heavenly beings than the Creator who rules them, today we'd simply call them angels. So, and we don't need to make assumptions about who can become a deity or what's the exact relationship between angels and humans. On the Christian understanding, angels and humans are two different species. So humans do not become angels, and that is consistent. Now, with both of these texts, it's not proved by either of these texts, but it is consistent with them. So what I would say to your friend is that there are things that Christians can acknowledge here, but they are consistent with a Christian understanding of the divine Trinity, where there are these lesser beings that are sometimes in the Old Testament called gods, and sometimes they're called sons of God, and today we'd call them angels. But on the Christian view, we can't become them, and we certainly cannot become equal to the Creator. That's something that is nowhere envisioned in either testament. So that kind of sketches what I'd have to say to your friend if we were having a discussion of these points.
How's that, Alyssa?
Okay. That's really helpful. My only caveat is I've heard from, I think it's Joe Heschmeyer, that when the Bible says son of God, son of a dog, they mean is a dog, is God, that sort of thing. So I guess it would be like.
Well, I may have said in that regard, so I can't really comment on that. But there are clearly uses of the phrase "son of" that imply a difference between what you're talking about. So, like when Jesus refers to his opponents as sons of the devil, it doesn't mean that his opponents are literally demonic entities. They're clearly humans. So the phrase "son of" has a wide meaning, and it doesn't imply identicality between the son and what's being referred to. Not in all contexts. It may in some, but in others, like for example, a Hebrew idiom in the Old Testament is "sons of the South," and that just means Southerners. So the Judeans were from the southern tribe of Judah. They could be called sons of the South or Southerners, but they were not identical with the South. The South is a direction of the compass. It is not a person. Similarly, Judas is referred to as the son of destruction, but he's not himself destruction. He's a human being. So even though in some situations a son may be equal to the father in one sense, that doesn't mean that someone described as a son is equal to, much less identical with, what they're a son of in all contexts. You have to go context by context.
Alyssa, thank you so much for your question. We're going to go ahead and leave that right there because it's time for the final break. And when we come back, we'll finish it off with Jimmy Akin.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and his gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
This is Conversations with Consequences, where we delve deeper into issues affecting our church, our country, and our core, the family.
As Catholics, we need to be informed, aware, and able to talk through some of the tough topics that we're facing in our culture and in our world. Conversations with Consequences gives us the tools to do so.
It's not enough to pray. We have to be a light for the world.
Conversations with Consequences, tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Back to the phones we go because there's only a few minutes left. We go over to Roberto in Southern California, watching on YouTube. Roberto, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, gentlemen.
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to the question, just this prior one, and if I may chime in with my idea here, what was my opinion?
Okay.
When it comes out to this Mormon stuff, it is very clear that the Bible, the Word of God, is true because it says that this gospel will be preached to the whole world as a witness to all nations, and then shall the end come. And there are much more that prove that. But, so, we ought to believe the Bible, because it's truth. And also, let's recall what it says in Galatians.
Roberto, how can I be of service to you?
Okay, I was just going to make this comment real quick. I was going to ask you a question. But, like, in Galatians, it says that whoever comes with another gospel, let's not listen to them. So, it's obvious that Mormons come with another gospel. Okay, so moving that aside. I also listened to the gentleman. His name was Robert. I remember because it's Roberto, right? So he said his question was about the 12 stars on the crown of the Virgin Mary. Now, in Revelation chapter 1, Revelation 21 speaks of this subject further. But it says that the 12 crowns, the crown and the 12 stones are for each tribe of Israel. And it says that the bride coming down out of heaven is the New Jerusalem. What do you think of that?
What passage are you referring to?
So in Revelation chapter 12, verse 1, it says that a sign appeared in heaven, right?
Right.
And it says that a woman with a crown and 12 stars, right? And in Revelation chapter 21, it goes further to describe who this woman is, and it says that it's New Jerusalem, with the crown being the stones of the 12 tribes of Israel. That's why he mentioned that, I think.
Well, it doesn't mention a crown in Revelation 21. That word does not appear in that chapter.
You know what? I don't recall the crown, but if it says, it does say that it's 12 stones, 12 gates, 12 angels.
Well, yeah, it does. It does describe this. This is Revelation 21:12. It says that the city New Jerusalem, had a high wall with 12 gates, and with 12 angels at the gates. On the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. And there were 3 gates on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, and 3 on the west. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. We're also elsewhere told that the gates were made out of giant pearls, which is why you'll hear people describe them as the pearly gates, because they're made out of giant pearls. And the foundations of the city are made out of different precious stones. But so that's what Revelation 21 says. What's your question about it?
Well, because if you start from verse 9, it says that one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls with the 7 last plagues came to me saying, "Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." And, and so he carried me to the heaven, and out of heaven came, it was because this refers in Revelation 12, it refers that a sign appeared in heaven. And right here is describing a woman in heaven, but it's the bride. And it goes on to consequently describe the 12, everything's described because God speaks in parables, so this is clearly fitting. Now,
so what's your question for me?
If Revelation 12 speaks of the Virgin Mary, is there another witness to that?
If Revelation 12 speaks of the Virgin Mary, is there another witness to Revelation 12 speaking of the Virgin Mary? Is that the question?
That's it, yes, clearly, yes. Thank you.
Well, there are certainly a lot of people who have interpreted Revelation 12 as being about Mary. I mean, the text itself indicates that she gives birth to this man-child whose destiny is to rule the nations. And in context, Revelation 12 associates the man-child with, that means a male child is all that means. The male child is associated with ruling with a rod of iron, which is a symbol of the Davidic kingdom in the Old Testament. And so it's clear that this woman gives birth to Jesus. So one of the things she represents is the Virgin Mary. That is not the only thing she represents. I think you're correct that the bride of the Lamb that we see in Revelation chapters 21 is also linked in and 22 is also an elaboration of this image of the woman, and that represents the church, the New Jerusalem, the community of the saved. There are other possible images you can see here in addition, like the original Eve, because in Revelation 12 we have a conflict between a woman, her seed, and the serpent, and that reflects the proto-evangelium from Genesis 3. And you can also see the woman as a symbol of the Jewish people. So I think between Eve, Mary, the church, and the Jewish people, this woman has multiple meanings, which are brought out by different aspects of the text. I think the weakest of the three is actually Eve, but there are these multiple aspects because John uses what is sometimes called polyvalent symbolism, where a single symbol can refer to more than one thing. And I think this is an example of that. But one of the things it does refer to is the Virgin Mary.
Roberto, thank you so much for your question. We're going to go ahead and leave that right there. Patrick in South Carolina, if you can be quick, we can get you an answer because we are coming up to the end of the show. Go right ahead.
Hey, so Colossians 1:15 says that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. So my question for you, Jimmy, is really more opinion-based, but I was just curious if you think that maybe when God walked through the Garden of Eve and talked with Adam and Eve in person, or God visited Abraham with his two angels, was that Jesus pre-incarnate? Or what do you think that looked like?
Okay, so as always, I think the principle is try to figure out what a text means on its own term, in its own cultural context, before we try to relate it to later stuff. And in the Old Testament, the doctrine, as the Catechism points out, the doctrine of the Trinity had not been clearly revealed. That was something that was revealed with the coming of Christ. So Old Testament Jews were not thinking in terms there was some indication of a plurality within the Godhead. Like I mentioned earlier, there was a recognition that, okay, there's Yahweh, and then there's the second Yahweh or the lesser Yahweh, who's also God, but yet somehow distinct from God. But they didn't have a clear revelation of the Trinity. And so the starting point for biblical interpretation is figure out what did the human author mean. That's the literal sense of the text. Anything else beyond what the human author was aware of is the spiritual sense of the text. So in the literal sense of the text, the author of Genesis did not have a clear awareness of the Trinity. And in the Old Testament, whenever they referred to God, they tended to think of who we would call the Father. That's why Jesus says in John's Gospel, you believe in God, believe also in me. So the one they're already thinking of as God, that's his Father. And so based on that, God in the Jewish mind was identified with the Father, and they didn't have a clear understanding of the Trinity. The logical interpretation of what did the author of Genesis mean in Genesis 3, where God walks in the garden, or later on where God appears to Abraham, it would be that it's who we would call the Father doing that. Now, having said that, God is aware of more than what the human author is aware of. That's why there is a spiritual sense of the text. And so, God is aware that he's a Trinity, and he knows about the Son. And so you could propose that the pre-incarnate Christ is referred to here, at least in the spiritual sense of the text. You could even propose that he's there in the literal sense of the text, but there's no obvious exegetical way to establish that, given the Jewish identification of the term God with the Father and the lack of a clear revelation of the Trinity. There's more that can be said about this, and also he'd get into the angel of the Lord, but we're at the end of the hour, so I'm afraid we'll have to do that another day.
Great. Thanks for your question, Patrick. Thank you for being quick as well. That's been 2 hours, Jimmy. Thank you so much for joining me. This was a lot of fun.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, when we come back next week, you'll get more of Cy Kellett, more of all the apologists that we have here at Catholic Answers. It's been a blast, and I hope you guys have a great weekend Enjoy this beautiful Divine Mercy Sunday coming up. Keep us in prayer, and we will keep you in prayer. And this has been Catholic Answers Live.